Warren Harding, 29th President of the United States and head of the most scandalous administrations. It was a real disaster. He was born in Ohio. He was a bit adrift as a young man, became a teacher, then an insurance salesman, and finally found his calling when he opened the Marion Daily Star newspaper. He invested well, made a lot of money. Now, Harding married Florence Kling. She was 31, he was 26. Now, he was prone to having several physical breakdowns, and the pressure would get to him. But Florence kept things going. She made more money off the newspaper than he did. Now, Florence had a childhood friend, Susie Hodder, and after 3 years of marriage, Harding had an affair with her. Well, Florence found out and she was angry, but she forgave him. Soon afterwards, Harding met Harry Daugherty, who saw the potential in Warren Harding and told him to get into politics. Well, with Daugherty's encouragement, Harding made his way from the Ohio Senate to the state Senate in Washington. He made it. Now, Harding would never take sides. He supported women's rights to vote, but he said he would wait to see what the state of Ohio said. He was nuanced this way. He really didn't want to take sides. Another issue was prohibition. Harding liked to drink, but he wouldn't say no to prohibition. He said, well, we have to modify the law, we have to study it. And in the end, what happened was, well, prohibition kicked in, but women were allowed to vote. Now, Harding and Florence were friends with another couple, James and Carrie Phillips. They would go on cruises together, go to parties together. Well, I don't have a picture of Carrie when she was young, but they said she looked like the Gibson girl. This is a Gibson girl. Now, Carrie lost a son. Her husband had a breakdown, and Carrie, of course, was devastated. So what did Warren Harding do? Well, he had an affair with Carrie. After 6 years, Florence found out. She was angry, but Harding had Carrie and her husband leave. They went to Europe. Now, Harding had a friend who had a daughter who was 16. Her name was Nan Britton. Now, Harding was 31 years older. Nan was a big flirt. She'd wear her short skirts and she'd walk around. She kind of pursued Harding. Harding resisted at first, but a few years later, they got involved. Now, Daugherty, meanwhile, was pushing Harding to now run for president in 1916 or 1920. By this time, Carrie Phillips had come back from Germany, and she and Harding began their affair again. Now, Carrie actually convinced Harding not to run for president in 1916. If he had, he would have won. And who knows, maybe we would not have gone to World War I. Now, while people made speeches in the Senate, Harding would write love letters to Carrie and Nan Britton. This was a big mistake. You see, Carrie was now blackmailing Harding, saying she would publish the love letters if he, as a senator, voted for the war in Europe. Some say she was a German spy. Well, Harding voted for the war anyway, but he was getting very nervous. And then came a bombshell. Nan Britton was pregnant. She was 19, and Harding pleaded with her to have an abortion. She said she didn't believe in abortions, and that was that. Enter Harry Daugherty. He spoke to Miss Britton and told her to keep it quiet, at least for the good of the country. They decided to pay her some child support month to month, and she agreed. Nan had her baby and named her Elizabeth. Well, Harding decided to play it safe and try to break off the affair with Carrie Phillips, but she wouldn't hear of it. She wanted him to leave his wife and marry her, or she would publish the love letters. Enter Harry Daugherty. He spoke to Carrie and said he would give her $25,000, a trip to Europe for her and her husband, and $2,000 a month for as long as Harding was in politics if she would hand over the letters and keep her mouth shut. She agreed. This became a pattern. Harding would get in trouble and Daugherty would get him out. Harding had an affair with Ms. Augusta Cole. She got pregnant. Daugherty paid her to have an abortion. Rosa Hoyle got pregnant. Daugherty gave her child support. Harding had an affair with his secretary, Grace Cross. Daugherty gave her hush money. Harding broke off an affair with a woman in New York. She committed suicide. Daugherty hushed it up. In one wild party that Harding attended, a prostitute got accidentally hit over the head with a bottle. She died later on. Daugherty kept it quiet. Mays Haywood, given hush money. Chorus girl Blossom Jones, given hush money. There were more chorus girls, girls of all kinds. There was a reporter from the Washington Post. Daugherty hushed everybody. Well, finally, 1920. Warren Harding, thanks to the woman vote, becomes the 29th President of the United States. And for his troubles, Harding names Harry Daugherty Attorney General. Now, Harding gave out his ideas, but he let the Secretary of State Hughes deal with foreign affairs. He was against the occupations of Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, and Dominican Republic. He did pull out the troops in Cuba. There was a famine in Russia, and Harding sent food. Now, Harding wanted to do business with Russia. The Secretary of State said no, we couldn't recognize that Bolshevik government they had. They never came to an agreement. Harding did reach out to African Americans, and he tried to pass an anti-lynching law that he sent over to the Senate. Now, the Senate decided to discuss this. I don't know what there is to discuss when it comes to lynching, but anyway, Harding unfortunately tied the anti-lynching law to another law, and it fell through. He did pardon and release social activists that were against World War I, including Eugene Debs. When it came to the fairly new invention of the radio frequency regulations were implemented. He negotiated war debt relief for European nations, he pushed for disarmament, and even though he was pro-business and anti-union, Harding had good luck. Unemployment had gone down drastically. All in all, not a bad record. Unfortunately, Harding's friends Daugherty and buddies, well, he owed them a lot, and they were going to collect. Harding once said, "I don't mind my enemies, it's my friends that keep me up at night." You see, Daugherty and his friends, now known as the Ohio Gang, would gamble and drink near the White House. They would sell audiences to the president, pass a message to him. Of course, you had to pay. Bribery and kickbacks. That was just the tip of the iceberg. One of the greatest scandals in American history was a Teapot Dome scandal. There were a few oil reserves, naval reserves, that were put under the charge of the Secretary of Interior, Albert Fall. Well, Albert Fall decided to lease the oil reserves to an oil company. Nothing wrong with that, it's completely legal. But he did this without allowing others to bid. He leased it over to the Sinclair Oil Company. Nothing illegal about that, even though it was frowned upon. However, for his efforts, he received $400,000, completely illegal. This was discovered, and an investigation came over. It was dragged out for a while, but Albert Fall was eventually indicted and became the first cabinet member to go to jail. Now, this was the age of prohibition. It was illegal to sell or drink liquor. However, if you owned a pharmacy, you could sell liquor for medicinal purposes as long as you had a permit. So, Attorney General Daugherty and his aide Jess Smith were involved in a money-making scheme. They would sell these pharmaceutical permits to gangsters, and the gangsters, all they had to do was, well, either open a pharmacy or pretend that they owned one. Eventually, Jess Smith was found out. Harding was furious and asked him to resign. Jess Smith instead went home and committed suicide. Now, even though Harding had denied World War I veterans a bonus, saying the country could not afford it, he felt for the war veterans. He wanted to help, and it was a pet project of his wife, Florence. They would open hospitals across the land. So, he opened the Veterans Affairs Bureau, and he put in charge of the bureau a good friend of his, Charles Forbes. So Forbes was in charge of overseeing the construction of many veteran hospitals across the country that would be worth, well, in contracts, millions of dollars. Forbes accepted large bribes from these companies, and he traveled the country on taxpayers' expense. Forbes overstaffed the VA by hiring a lot of his friends. He also bought, with government money, millions of dollars of medicine and supplies, and then sold them on the black market. And if you were a war veteran who needed help, well, good luck. Of the 300,000 claims the veterans put forth, 90% of them were turned down. The head of one construction company was Elias Mortimer. Mortimer seeked out Forbes, Had him go out and gamble, got him women, they would party, and in return, well, Forbes would give Mortimer exclusive government contracts for the hospitals. Mortimer would inflate his prices, split the profits with Forbes. All, in about 2 years, Forbes stole about $2 million. That's $12 million in today's currency. Well, eventually, President Harding found out, and when he did, he was furious. He actually physically attacked Forbes, threw him on the ground, and began to strangle him. Somebody stopped him, of course. And then Forbes left the country because he was under investigation. Now, Forbes came back, decided to take his chances and testify. However, his good friend Elias Mortimer, the construction head, found out that Forbes had had an affair with Mortimer's wife. So Mortimer was more than happy to testify against Forbes. Forbes went to jail. Now, no one has ever linked President Harding to any crime, but he was getting increasingly depressed. You see, he continued his affair with Nan Breton, but the stress and the juggling was getting to him. So, one day, being stressed out, I don't know, while he was traveling, whether it was stress or food poisoning or exhaustion, he got very, very sick and caught pneumonia. So, while he was sick in bed and his wife Florence was reading to him, he had a sudden convulsion and passed away. He was 57 years old and had been president for a little over 2 years. The child support money for little Elizabeth was discontinued. Her mother would later write a book about her affair with Harding. Carrie Phillips, her checks were discontinued, and the FBI would investigate her for the rest of her life, thinking she was a German spy. Harry Daugherty was under many investigations, but they never indicted him on anything. Now, could Warren Harding, a capable man, have been a good president? If he had been less reckless and had a better choice of friends, maybe he would have. Unfortunately, well, he undermined the presidency, and he is known as one of the worst presidents the country has ever had. Well, that's it. Subscribe to Cool Talk. Comment below. Send me your likes. Have a good day.